Hi guys, it's Ollie from Rad Season. I'm stoked to be joined today by professional ice climber Gordon McArthur. Gord, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks. I'm psyched to be here.
And whereabouts are you at the moment, Gord?
Well, currently I'm in my office at the climbing gym. Just another typical day in the week. So just hanging out and just relaxing at the moment.
Yeah, and what's everything been like over there with the current situation? Have you been able to get out, and are you still working in the gym? And
Yeah, so right now in Canada, or BC specifically, it's getting a little worse. Canada in general is getting pretty bad. A lot of provinces have been going into lockdown. BC got some pretty hard sort of protocols smacked onto us last week, which has affected a lot of people. Essentially, we're in sort of a lockdown right now in that we're not allowed to travel, we're not allowed to leave our region. So climbing in general has been a bit like sort of on the shelf at the moment because we can't leave town effectively. And all the climbing that I would like to go to, is more in like the Alberta sort of Banff National Park area. So right now it's sort of just training and keeping fit. I had a bit of a shoulder injury, so I'm on the tail end of that now and getting back. So it's been a good time to be injured, I guess.
yeah,
But we're getting back to it, and hopefully, travel restrictions will get lifted soon, and we'll get back to it.
yeah, I think so. I'd love to, I guess, jump back to where you grew up because you're originally from Toronto. Is that right?
Yeah, just south of Toronto. I grew up as sort of a gym rat, but didn't have a lot of exposure to outside. It wasn't really until, I moved to BC when I was 19 that I got more into the mountains and got to really experience climbing as a whole.
Yeah. So, I mean, were you sort of playing other sports when you were older, when you were younger, and and sort of you must have been pretty active, and then that kind of sort of spark climbing, or
Yeah, definitely. Like growing up, my dad played professional soccer, and so I was sort of born into sports. And living in the Toronto region, it's very sport oriented, and so I played football, I played tennis and soccer, and hockey and all those things. It was very very sport oriented, and then when I moved to BC, actually I kind of shifted gears a bit in that I still did a lot of sports like backcountry skiing and whitewater paddling and climbing and such. But then, climbing slowly but surely took sort of over everything, and everything sort of got put to the side, and climbing became a full-time gig.
and when did you then sort of discover ice climbing? Was
Um,
that around the same sort of time, or were you sort of you were climbing already? And
yeah, it was a bit later actually. I moved to BC when I was 19, but it wasn't until I was about 23 that I discovered, well, not say discovered, but got into it. And it was sort of a fluke thing. I was driving from Calgary through the mountains back to where I lived, which at the time was in Vermeer, and the Canmore Ice Festival was on, and so my friend and I sort of stopped by just to see what all the hype was, and there's this big sign saying free clinics, and so guys like Will Gadd and Sean Isaac and Barry Blanchard, they're all giving free clinics. So well, my friend and I were quite keen to jump into it. I mean, free clinics is a pretty big deal, so we went to the famous Hafner Creek, and I was hooked instantly. And so I sort of made it my goal to become friends with these guys, as annoying as it was to them, I think. And they became mentors and now close friends. So it worked out.
that's awesome. And then when did you when you got into it? Were you then just sort of was the enthusiasm just building, or were you like, okay, like I think I could give this a go and try and compete? Or
I think the enthusiasm started to build really quickly. And then the notion of competing, because in that same festival, they had like this elite comp where all the world's best. I mean, the late Harry Berger was there, and, a lot of European climbers that were very, very sort of top of the game were all there. And so to watch that was like mind blowing to me. And there was something that resonated with me in that style of climbing. And so slowly I got into the comps, and like Will Gadd became my coach, which was like super important to my journey, and mentor. And him sort of showing me the ways of the competitive side of things sort of helped me learn how to get into it and then how to be better at it. And it sort of just grew and grew from there.
and would you say, I mean, like, was it back then early on that when you were training? Obviously, it's both physical and mental, right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
was there like in the early days when you were younger, was there a lot of focus on like taking the training really seriously, and or was it did that come later when you were sort of when you were progressing and when you were competing?
I mean, the idea of how to train, whether it be physically or mentally, was certainly a thing when I first got into it, but I didn't understand it enough to put the necessary time or like the specific focus time, especially on the mental side. I know Will, when we first started working together, he introduced me to a few books and I read them and I could see the value in them, but maybe I was just too naive to process the importance. And it wasn't until I got onto the World Cup scene where a friend of mine, Mark Beverly, him and I, we basically had to figure out how to train on our own because we didn't know the other competitors yet. Some of the strong guys like, Marcus Benler from Austria, who was world champion for many years, he knew how to train, but we didn't know him. So we could only sort of watch and then sort of, regroup and figure it out ourselves. And so it wasn't until maybe like 2 or 3 years into my competitive career that I understood how to start looking at mental toughness or specific sport training or that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And were you sort of basing yourselves in different locations for training, or was it all being done at home and then you'd go off when you're on tour?
Well, that's a great question, actually. At first, it was certainly because we didn't know anybody on the World Cup tour. We figured out how to sort of build training apparatuses on our own. So I came up with this idea to build this 35-foot arch in my backyard. And it was sort of a funny story because I was in Russia. I had a friend's place training in Russia, and I woke up with this idea and I drew it down, and I still have that picture framed actually in my gear room. But there was more to it than that. Like where I live, there's not a lot of places to train. I was always going to like the Bow Valley or overseas or whatever. And that was just sort of more time away from my family on top of the already months of competing away from them. And so the idea to build something at home was 2 parts. It was one, so I could have my own sort of specific sport training area, but as well, so I could be around home more. And it sort of worked out well in both cases.
Yeah, that's good. And then with that, would you get people over and you guys would train together, or is it more kind of, you just wanted it was in your backyard and it was your thing, or would you bring in the team as well?
No, certainly I would bring in like there's people that in my area that also competed, like Noah Beek or Ineke Rehbergen or Carly Hall. Like the 4 of us would train there quite often. It's sort of like a Team Canada thing. And other competitors like Nathan Kutcher from the East Coast, he would come over as well. And then as we met more people on the world tour and became friends with more people, they too would come over. Like we've had some of the Italian team like Angelica Reiner, or the Swiss team like Petra Klinger, like many teams would come over and just hang out. And that was a pretty special thing to have a training facility that other people around the world thought it's something to come and train at and travel to. So it was neat.
And how long would you be away for? So when you do go away, I mean, would that be sort of the whole winter season when you'd be off?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of varied year to year. I mean, the year that we went to the Olympics in Sochi, I think I was gone for almost 2.5 months. That was a pretty rough year for my family, but they actually came over halfway when we were in Switzerland. So that was a neat thing for them to come over and see the comp and experience that sort of atmosphere. But I would say the travel part's, one of the hardest parts about competing is that, not only are you living out of a suitcase in airports for 2 months, but you're also gone from your family. Like I had the climbing gym and friends and just the social aspect and the non-stress parts of life. You kind of miss that when you leave. So it's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
Yeah, and you've got 2 daughters, is that right?
Yeah, I've got 2 teenage daughters, both girls, 14 and 13, and it's a wild ride, let me tell you.
and would they come with you? Like sometimes you could go with your wife and with them when you were competing, or?
Yeah, they came once a few years ago, and so my wife and 2 daughters, and then my wife's mother came as well, and they came to Switzerland, which was really cool because Saas Fee is a really special place, and not only is it beautiful, but the atmosphere of the competition is like none other, and so it was neat for them to come experience that. And though in other years my wife has come with her sister, and we've traveled down the coast of Italy and done some pretty fun things. So we were hoping actually for all of us to go this winter, but with coronavirus, it's all sort of
Yeah.
been put on hold. So yeah.
I know. So I mean, like, yeah, like hopefully next year there can be, sort of when travel opens up, then there'll be different stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Oh no, it's just a weird thing. Like, for me, having been competing for 10 years, to all of a sudden not competing, and not by choice, but because you're told not to, you really realize, like, what you miss, like the people or the travel that you thought you were sick of, you actually end up missing it quite a lot. So it's a very strange sort of process to shelf these things, with the notion of, we hope it's next year.
Yeah. And how, I mean, through that time competing over a decade, how have you stayed motivated? What's been your...
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. My motivation, it's sort of this thing that's just internal, and it's hard to explain, but I guess, like, for me personally, I always keep being reminded that there's still more left to produce, and not to prove, because if you're out to prove something, you're gonna fall on your face all the time. Like, it's not about that. It's more so like believing in what you're capable of. And
Mhm.
the cool thing about climbing in general is that there's always things to learn. And with our sport, it's ever evolving. I mean, even the smallest of details are always evolving. And so it's just been such a fascinating ride to continue to learn, adapt, and grow. And yeah, I guess just that belief that there's still more to give. I'm getting older now, so it feels like less and less. But you look at certain athletes in the world, like, Tom Brady, the quarterback for now the Buccaneers. I mean, he's 42 years old and still producing, and that's motivating. But even in my sport, Sergei Tarasov from Russia, I mean, he competed 2 years ago, or even last year, I think it was, and he's 58, maybe. You'll kill me if
Oh,
I'm doing
wow.
it or saying it wrong, but like, I mean, it just goes to show you that if you can hold on to your motivation as well as keep your body healthy, I mean, what's the point in stopping? So
Exactly.
yeah.
And if you're still enjoying it, right? I mean, that's got to be the
Yeah.
main thing. And
Yeah. Yeah. For us, a lot of the enjoyment is not only from the sport itself, but also the relationships we have with the other competitors. Like, it is kind of like a big family, that you just look so forward to seeing to every year. So
yeah. And is there, I mean, with the Russians and, some of the other with some of the other Europeans, and they're sort of, I guess, renowned within this sport for having quite good results and doing well within the competitions. What would you say is, like, the reasoning behind that? Is that it's sort of something that is like grassroots when they're younger, and they kind of like...
yeah, I mean, whether it be the Russians, I mean, the Koreans are very, very strong too, or I mean, there's been showings from the Swiss now. But I mean, I think, like, long term with the Russians, they have access to really cool training structures,
Mhm.
which resonate, like, almost perfectly with the comp style. And two, like, a lot of them, it's a way of life. Like, if you go to a place like Kirov, where they have that massive structure under the ski jump, like, they live and breathe that structure. And so, just the accessibility, and how they have incorporated it into their daily lives, has given them the ability to continue on with it so specifically and so diligently. But then also too, you know, um, a lot of the Russian athletes had, like, government support, which
Mhm.
certainly played a big role. Now, I've been lucky to have support through the Alpine Club of Canada, which has been really great. But with the Russians, it's actual, like, government support, and so they're like, "Here's a chunk of money to get you through this season. Now focus on this."
Yeah.
And so that's been really helpful. But then again, like with the Koreans, some of them didn't have that, but they still had that mentality. And I guess that maybe what it comes down to is just, like, that diligent mentality to stick with it. And I feel like I've had that, but it's certainly not quite as easy when it's so much of the time it's been just me. There's been a few years where I've had other athletes with me, but I think long term of my whole career, living where I do, the small little town in the mountains, it's more or less just been just me. So yeah,
Yeah, and then
it's
that's
been
kind
tougher.
of... Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely, and then especially, yeah, I mean, but then it's good that you can travel, and you get to connect with all these people at, like when you go to the events and everything.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
now with the relationships that I have, whether it be, some of my Russian friends or Swiss friends or, French or whatever, or Korean friends, like, now what I typically do is I have that ability to go off season to these countries and train with them
yeah,
and learn and grow with them, which has been really wonderful.
That's awesome. And then, I mean, I guess going from 2014, 2015, when you won the North America ice climbing championship, and then when you guys were competing for Team Canada over in Sochi, how did you then sort of, I guess keep going, and then sort of keep the motivation going after that?
Yeah, that's a good question. 2014 was a really big year for me. There was a lot of hype built behind it. It was 2014 was actually the first year that the Bozeman Ice Festival held a specific World Cup. So there was a lot of hype behind that. And effectively, that was like our backyard, even though I'm in Canada. But and the atmosphere was just electric. There's a lot of competitors into it, whether Canada or US. I remember walking out in the finals, and there was like 3,500 people 10 feet from you. So that was like incredible. And there was just this next level of energy. It's almost like superhuman powers that you were given to try harder. And the cool thing about that particular composite in the semifinals, I actually tore my rotator cuff, and I couldn't even lift my arm. And so my coach, got me through that. And the finals, it didn't matter. So there was that. And then of course, we had the Olympics, and we didn't compete at the Olympics specifically because it was just a demonstration sport, but just the idea of being at the Olympics and showcasing our sport in front of thousands of people. It was all over the news, which was cool. It was just a neat thing to be there. And then, to come down from that, it actually it's interesting. It gave me a lot of depression. I remember coming home, and it was like 4 or 5 months of pretty heavy depression because there was so much hype behind that season. To go forward from that was really difficult.
Yeah.
But I think once you sort of talked about that and got through that, the idea of continuing on and feeling that drive of I still have more to give. And then of course the people that you climb and train with, I really relied on them heavily too. Like a good friend of mine, Hyung Park from Korea, every year he's like, you must come back. And so that motivation and that drive certainly helped to keep going.
Yeah. And then you guys would sort of, I guess just help each other out with that, if
we all
you're
rely.
down, and
Sure. I mean, at the end of every season, I always have this funny conversation with Hyung. He's like, you come back? Okay, I come back. And it's like, I don't come back. Okay, I don't come back. And then we go back and forth, for 4 months. And then, come June or July, we both say, okay, we come back. So I personally do rely on other athletes for that encouragement, because otherwise it's hard to keep that motivation on your own.
Yeah. And then, I guess it's also important to have a break as well. I mean, you kind of need that just to, reconnect with family and, have that time off away from it, or would you also be training sort of the whole year round, no matter what, in between seasons?
Mentally for me, climbing has been such a big part of my life for so long that I've found it very hard to ever take a time off. What I've always found, and maybe this is why I got injured, is that I would, compete and train. I would start training in July, and then we would carry that through the comp season, and we get back middle of March, and then maybe I would take a week off of anything just to get over jet lag, and then I'd go right into rock climbing training because rock season was right there. So I never really took a break per se, even though there's a lot of science that says at some point you should take a month off. And it's easier said than done. I've been injured for the last 2 months, and it's been horrible. not climbing and
just getting bored, right? Getting itchy.
It drives you mental, because then of course the mental game of I'm losing my strength, and what if I can't come back from this, and what if I lose my motivation and whatever else. And yesterday is actually the first time that I climbed again, and you could just feel this drive instantly, saying okay, now it's back to business again.
Yeah.
So
and what brought on the decision to retire then in 2018? What happened there?
Yeah, I think that was I definitely struggle in general with a lot of depression and anxiety, which it's funny, a lot of people I have a hard time talking about it, and so do I. So to say that right now on this is pretty funny. But like I think like over the years, those two things sort of to build up, whether it be life in general or climbing specific or whatever. And then I remember before the season started, I had this thing in my head where I was like, I don't want to go. Um, as you get used to traveling to all the same places every year, the same place for 10 years, you know the steps that are involved. And for some reason, I just had this like mental block of like not wanting to leave. And then when we did leave to go, I couldn't shake it. And my mental stability was like just being shaken left and right by whatever, whether it be the comps or people around me or anything, or the anxiety of not being at home, or having just opened a climbing gym. It was very difficult to process all those things whilst being on the other side of the world. And when we went to Inner Mongolia, and from the get-go, the logistics of that were pretty shaky. And when we got there, it was very foreign and hard. And even when we got to the hotel, like there was police everywhere, and they were pretty pissed off at us being there because we were white. And that was very hard to sort of process. And then, of course, the next day we went to the venue, and it was -40. And they brought us to the athletes' tent, and typically they're heated with water, food, etc. And there was no heat, there's no food, and we had to be there for 12 hours. So it's like basically, I mean, it sounds sort of silly, but like we had to survive in this condition of -40 for 12 hours. Our water was freezing, our food was freezing. We still had to compete, and it was sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back. And so I remember getting back from the qualifiers, and I was saying to the two people I was training with or traveling with, Noah and Inika, the two Canadian athletes, I said, I'm going home. Like, I can't do this. And so I called my wife and said, I'm out. Like, I booked the next flight and went home. And it was such a weird thing to do that. And I actually felt good about that, or relieved, I guess you could say, because the idea of still having to go to Korea after that and then Russia, it's like, I can't do it. And so I basically said, like, that's it. I'm done. Like, I've done this long enough. And that was it. I canned it. So it was very emotionally based and led, for sure. It wasn't thought out at all.
And then when you got home, was it then just sort of, just thinking about everything and that whole downtime? And then obviously one of your sponsors got in contact with you and about, coming back into the sport, right? I mean,
yeah, that was sort of a funny time because I had, well, in my mind, I sort of just blocked it all out, and I kept telling myself that I was okay with this. And then I think it came to, I think it was July maybe. I was out in the back patio with my wife, and she just randomly asked me, like, so how are you doing? Because right now you would typically start training. I thought, oh yeah, I'm fine, it's okay, like no big deal, and sort of just shuffle it away. And then it was literally the next day where my athlete manager from Outdoor Research called me and said, hey, so I've got this weird news for you. We just became a title sponsor for the World Cup Tour. And I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. And he said, yeah, but we only have one athlete that competes, so we kind of were hoping you'd go back. And then instantly I thought, okay, like it wasn't in a hesitation. It was like, all right, I'm back in. And it was like, maybe subconsciously, I was just waiting for that reason.
That sign, right?
Yeah. And so right away, I just felt this like rejuvenated fire, like I was going back for my first time, or going to it for my first time. It was like a reset button, and I got really fired up about it. And they helped me build my training wall, which is cool because it's not cheap. Because when we moved, I took my big arch down, hence the whole retirement thing. It was just like a chapter of my life that was over. So I gave all the wood away, and that was the end of it. So OR helped me build a structure, and in the backyard again, of course. And essentially I just had this newfound energy, and was very excited to go back. And when I went back, I ended up getting a couple of results that were some of my best, which was actually quite cool.
That's awesome. And then sort of going on from that, I mean, was that it then? Was that you were like, okay, I'm back in, I'm going to be training solidly and traveling and competing? Or
yeah, for sure. I mean, when I jumped back in, typically I traveled with people before, so this time I sort of went on my own, and which was interesting because that was very new to me. You almost feel
Mhm.
very vulnerable. But even with that notion in mind, I ended up hooking up with people that I never had before, and it worked out very well for me, which was neat. And so when I went back, I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to go back for one season. But when I went back, I met a lot of new people that relationships became some of my favorite now, and so that also played into the role of like I just want to keep going. It's
Yeah,
this new group, this new energy that was there, and that made it a whole new experience in general for me.
that's cool. And now I guess you're recovering from injury, and well, climbing again as of yesterday. You said, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
sort of back into it. What are you currently working on now that sort of travel's limited, and yeah, what are you focusing on at the moment?
Well, I mean, right this very moment, my coach and I and several sort of massage therapists we're working getting my shoulder stable again to start performing at a higher level.
Mhm.
The goal obviously is to get back to where I was and then grow from there. And there's signs that we're closer than we think, which is good. It was a pretty big
That's cool.
scare to get that MRI and it showed the tear. It turns out that tear was actually from a long time ago. And when I told my coach that, actually, he's like, "Oh man, that was from Bozeman 2014 when you hurt your shoulder." So we both laughed about that. But the idea now that my shoulder is getting back to working again, and with travel limited, I would like to go back into the mountains and sort of go back to where it all started and get comfortable there again. Because when I used to ice climb and mix them a lot in the mountains, I was very comfortable. But as you get away from that and you end up dry tooling, which is headspace wise, it's a bit easier, and then being gone for so much of the winter, I've missed out on that outside climbing a lot. So I'd
Mhm.
like to get back to those sort of roots again. But that being said, the UIAA has actually put together what they're calling a Tour de Alps, and they're inviting X amount of athletes, sort of from the World Cup Tour, to enter this bubble and have a 3 competition series.
Oh, cool.
And so that's still sort of on the docket. It's the end of January, and so I'm quite behind as far as training goes. And right now, Canada is effectively in lockdown, so I don't know if that's on the cards yet, or in the cards. But I'm still.
Where are they going to be trying to do that? Will that be
Well, the
over
3 locations would be, I think it's France and then 2 Switzerland,
okay?
and so um, you know it all depends on what things look like. It seems like every week things are changing around the world. So I'm hopeful for that, but at the same time, my focus is just going to be getting healthy again and climbing around the Rockies until then, if we're allowed. Right now, we can't even do that. Um,
Yeah.
Luckily, I've got this great venue close to home called the Bull River, where I've spent a lot of time climbing routes and bolting, and it's not quite in season yet, but in the next probably few weeks, it'll get a little better and spend time there if we have to, or go searching for new things, I guess,
Nice.
which is
And
cool too. So
yeah, exactly. Because you can, yeah, if you're exploring around your home, it's always good.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Are there any locations specifically that you really miss, or that that you would love to go back to?
As far as like overseas,
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, like every year, I think the most special place for me would be dry tooling in France at this place called Usine. It's this really big, like famous cave that we go to every year. And so this will actually be the first year in 10 years I haven't been to it, and so that'll be hard to miss. And there were a couple of other routes that I really wanted to do and finish off in Switzerland and Italy, but they'll have to just wait. They're not going to go anywhere. So we'll have to just sort of hit the reset button, and hopefully when things ease up, we'll be able to get over there.
Cool.
So
And yeah, any advice that you would give to someone that would be looking to get into it? So if they're sort of looking to start ice climbing.
yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot, in life in general, as well as being a professional athlete, and like there's a lot of ups and downs when you push within your own self as well as the sport in general. And it can be a harsh world. And so if I were to give advice, I would say, take it slow. Don't
Yeah.
rush things. Don't try and be something that you're not. And and like seek advice, seek help. Don't try and do it on your own, because to grow we need help. Whether that be life in general, within sport, like one of the biggest things I learned was to not think that I'm the man. Like there are always going to be people that are better than you in some shape or form, and to utilize their knowledge and skills. I mean, I'm always grateful for guys like Will Gadd, who mentored me for a very long time and is still, I mean, very helpful to me. I texted him the other day saying like, "Woe is me," and he's just like, "Just relax, like keep moving."
Yeah.
So I would say my advice in general would be take it slow, and seek skills from other people, and learn and accept that. Don't rush things.
And reach out to other people as well, right? I mean,
Yeah, the world is a resource, and if you can put yourself in a position to utilize those resources, do so. Like I said, I mean, when I first met guys like Gadd or Sean Isaac or Barry Blanchard, oh man, I must have annoyed them to death with like phone calls and emails saying like, be my friend, like, and so, but do it, like get in their faces, and they'll help you and teach you and show you the ways, because they're still teaching me to this very day, for sure.
Nice one. And if people want to follow what you're up to, what's the best way?
I mean, Instagram is probably the easiest way. I know that Facebook seems to be this archaic thing for only old people, so I would say Instagram would be the easiest way to follow, like what I'm up to, and what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, for sure.
Cool. Thanks, Gord. It's been good talking to you, man. And
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll definitely follow what's happening, and then our fingers crossed for everything for next year. And yeah, hope some of the events can continue.
Yeah, me too. Stay safe, everyone.
Cheers, man.
All right, thanks, guys.